Hello YouTube and welcome to this video. I hope you all had a great new year and is ready for a great 2023. So in this video I wanted to share the method I use to burn fat in terms of energy production. First of all, I would like to clarify that this is not a 5-minute easy six-pack guide or anything like that. I'm going to present the method I use to maximize the amount of fat my body can turn into energy through endurance training. I hope that you learned some new information and maybe get some inspiration in your own training and nutrition. Before we jump into it, I would like to mention that this method is created by Torbjørn Sindballe. So to start this video, I think it's important that we get clear on how our body produces energy. No matter what kind of sport you are doing or which intensity it is, your body needs to produce energy for every single muscle contraction. Therefore, it is important to know how the body produces energy and how you can train this process. For the muscle's ability to contract, it needs energy from the substance called ATP, which is stored in the muscle cells. There's only stored enough ATP in the cells for us to work for about 1 to 2 seconds. Hereafter, there is an additional storage of a substance called CRP, which can provide ATP for an extra 5 to 10 seconds of work. Are the muscles working for a longer period of time than this 6 to 12 seconds? Our body is dependent on an ongoing production of ATP. In this process, our body needs to reproduce our stored carbohydrates and fat into ATP. The third main nutrient is of course protein, which is the body's building stones. During drastic weight loss, protein can be transformed into carbohydrates and thereby be included in the energy production, but this only occurs in extreme cases, and protein is usually not included as a part of energy production. All the carbohydrates you consume in the form of rice, pasta, bread, and so on is broken down through your digestion and is converted into glucose in the liver. Glucose is the only form of sugar that can be used in the body. Apart from a small amount of glucose in the blood, the glucose is stored in the liver and muscles in the form of glycogen. Glycogen is long chains of glucose, which is ready to be converted into ATP and turned into energy when needed. Fat from the food that we consume is broken down into fatty acids. This process occurs in the gut and is hereafter transported through the blood to be burned in the muscles or to be stored in fat depots, both on the inside and the outside of the body to be used for isolation. There is a small part of the fat which is stored in the muscle cells, but most of the fat which is used for energy production comes from the large fat depots. To summarize, the human body has 4 types of energy storages: the small amount of ATP in the muscle cells, the additional storage of CRP, the glycogen stored in the liver and muscles, and our fat depots. So to give a visual representation, you can see in these pictures an example of how much energy the carbohydrate and fat depots weigh and how much each depot holds. This is an example of a 70 kilogram man with a body fat percentage of 10%. So as you can see, body fat is a very large energy source which is able to produce energy for multiple days of work, whereas carbohydrates are a limited source of energy which only can produce energy for a couple of hours of work. The burning of carbohydrates and fat has different speeds. This has a big impact on which type of fuel the body decides to use during training. When we work in an easy to moderate difficulty, our body is able to burn about 50% carbohydrates and 50% fat. This means that we are able to spare on the carbohydrate depots so they last for a longer time. If we're working on a much higher intensity, if we maybe are sprinting, our body needs to produce energy much faster. Because the burning of fat has a speed limit of which it can be burned, our body turns to burning a larger amount of carbohydrates. This means that the more intense the work is, the more carbohydrates is burned. This of course leads to the glycogen depots being emptied much faster. As you hopefully can see, there's an advantage to optimize the amount of fat our body can turn into energy if we're going to be working for a long period of time. This is of course very relevant for endurance athletes who wants to be able to work for a long period of time. And to our luck, there is actually a way where we can train our body's ability to burn a higher amount of fat during energy production. Studies have looked at what happens when endurance athletes only train on water without consuming carbohydrates during the training. In these situations, the studies show that there's an increase in the burning of fat and an increased activation in the enzymes that participates in the fat burning. Torbjørn Sindballe, who is a former world champion triathlete, and Lars Nyborg Nielsen, a professor at Copenhagen University, worked together to test this method back in 2007. Torbjørn Sindballe was at that time able to burn 0.8 grams of fat per minute when he was training with the consumption of carbohydrates. Then, when he turned over and only trained on water, he was able to burn 1.2 to 1.3 grams per minute. This means that he was able to raise his fat burning ability with 50 to 60%. This is of course very impressive, but how do I use it? It's actually very simple. In all my short trainings consisting of 1 to 2 hours, I only consume water. All of my long rides, I only begin to consume carbohydrates after the 2-hour mark. If you want to maximize this even more, you can keep the carbohydrates you consume to food sources with a low GI value. GI represents the glycemic index, which is a system that shows how quickly a certain food affects the blood sugar when the food is eaten on its own. Third, Torbjørn Sindballe also recommends that you ride a long ride only on water every 2 to 3 weeks. The longer rides can be anything from 2 to 6 hours. I have not yet experimented with this form of longer rides only on water, and therefore I can't give you my personal recommendation. But I still thought it was worth sharing. To end this video off, I would like to wish you all a happy new year and that 2023 will bring you a great time. I hope you've enjoyed this video and got some inspiration in your training and nutrition. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. And besides that, I want to wish you all a great weekend. Take care.